J.L. Wilson, State Director of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, Senate President Peter Courtney, and Ellen Lowe, who's a lobbyist for human and healthcare services. Representative Jeff Kropf was invited to participate today, but obviously something's come up and we'll go on ahead without him. Because I have a captive audience, I have a couple announcements I need to make. First one is just housekeeping kinds of things. The parking garage associated with this building closes at 6. So though our forum may continue on to 6:30-ish, if people stay around for questions, you need to have your cars out of the garage by 6. So you might want to go move them at this point if you don't want to be interrupted later on. Next Friday, January 16th, City Club presents a State of the Economy program at a regular Friday forum. And this will feature state economist Tom Potowski, who will present the outlook for Oregon's economy. And this will be at the Multnomah Athletic Club at noon. And you can make a reservation to participate online at www.pdxcityclub.org. And if you're not a City Club member, and I see a number of folks that I don't recognize from City Club, today would be a great day to join City Club. There's materials on the membership at the back of the room. You can join today, or you can join online. We'll begin today's program with a moderated panel discussion and conclude with question and answer period, so you'll have a chance to ask our panel questions. Again, thank you for attending this forum, and let me turn it over to Jim Westwood. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Andy. I'm Jim Westwood, and I'll be the moderator today for what I hope is going to be an informative and civilized discourse on Measure 30. I know there's a lot of heat being generated already, but you ain't seen nothing yet, I'm sure. It's gaining momentum. I think City Club has a chance here to be first, as we have been many times in the past, making this forum and debate the model for what's to follow in the coming 3 weeks before we cast our ballots. We can set the tone for it all by making it informative, by having a pointed but civil discourse, and I'm sure that our panelists will do that, and I trust that when we get to the question and answer period, we can continue in that vein as well. What we're trying to do is to inform the electorate. I understand that from pollster Tim Hibbets that there is a large undecided vote on this still. A lot of people haven't made up their minds, and we're hoping with information to be able to help those people make up their minds to vote either yes or no on Measure 30. So we want to raise the level of discourse. That's really the keynote for today. There is real money at stake here, obviously. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars. And pass or fail, Measure 30 is going to have some real effects on education, on business, the business climate of the state, social services, and on the pocketbooks of all of us. The format for today is two pieces. First, the panel discussion, followed by questions from you, the audience, and this mic will be handed around to you as we get to that part. I'll introduce our participants one by one, alphabetical order, so as to be fair there, and each of them, as I introduce him or her, will give a roughly 3-minute opening statement on their positions. We had planned to have 2 pro and 2 con on Measure 30. We have an imbalance because of the absence of Representative Kropp, but if he shows, obviously, he'll be coming in and doing his bit too. After the opening statements, I'll do my best to guide but not control about 20 or 30 minutes of discussion among the panel members of the issues and the information that they can give us about Measure 30, its consequences, and what's behind it. Having a legislator here, and we hope having 2 legislators, is going to be very helpful, as well as having people who have a real stake and can talk about the stakeholders and where Measure 30 would take them. Over the course of the discussion, there may fall what I would crudely call applause lines. I would earnestly request that if you do hear such a line, that you register your applause in the same way you register your vote and mail it in, rather than doing it overtly here. Certainly at the end, we'll have a chance to thank our participants, and the last half or so of this session will be devoted to questions and answers from the audience. I am shamelessly taking a clue from Andy Linehan. If you've been to City Club meetings you know that Andy has this wonderful little thing he holds up. If a question goes more than about 30 seconds, if the questioner takes more than roughly 30 seconds and is giving, you're expected to, obviously, this is like question time in Parliament. You can say, will the honorable gentleman concede so and so and so? You can give your point of view in your question, obviously. But if it goes on too long, I will, as Andy does at City Club, just hold up a little sign. And what that means is, please get to your question. And if this is not effective, who knows? Maybe we have vase, but we hope that we can keep the questions to a reasonable length, and the answers from the panel will, of course, be of whatever length they care to make them. And you can direct your questions to one member. You can direct it to the panel generally. And I hope that you'll respect the fact that these questions are intended to elicit some helpful responses. So as I said, I'll introduce our speakers one by one, and we'll do it alphabetically, and the C's go first. Senator Peter Courtney, President Peter Courtney, was elected Senate President in January of 2003. Before that, he served 7 terms as a state representative, and he served as House Democratic leader for 4 sessions. In the 2001 session, Senator Courtney introduced an historic package of bills that involved earthquake training, retrofitting. All of them passed to the benefit, we hope if the big one hits, of a lot of Oregonians and their health and safety. He has also been the chief sponsor of successful bills to establish guidelines and training for emergency medical personnel and for treating critically ill or injured children, and to provide for safe surrender of a newborn, and to protect initiative integrity. So he's been around for a while and has done some things. In the 2002 special sessions, Senator Courtney led bipartisan efforts to rebalance the state's budget, and here we are all over again. He currently is a professor at Western Oregon University. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Rhode Island and holds a law degree from Boston University. He's on the board of directors for the YMCA. He served on the board of United Way and volunteers also as a basketball coach for the Salem Boys and Girls Club. This is truly a man of many talents. Senator Courtney was also a member of the Salem City Council for many years and served on the Salem Area Mass Transit Board. He's been a political commentator, and now he's serving in the Senate as well. He also has a point of view on Measure 30. So Senator Courtney, I'd like to turn it over to you for 3 minutes or so of comments, and then we'll proceed beyond that. So it's yours.
Thank you. By way of information, a little known fact with little knowing, you might know that when I served in the Salem City Council, 1970 and 1980, the person sitting to my right served also in the City Council, and she served, and she was also seated to my right. So that's a little bit of trivia you might like to know. She had a happy face candle that she'd keep in front of her up here, and every time I'd say something she didn't like, she'd turn the happy face candle upside down. And she put me into therapy many times as a result of that, because, but I remember that so very well. That was back in 1901 when we served together, almost that long ago. Ballot Measure 30, quickly, what I will do is, because of the time limit, I will talk about how we got to where we got to. I spoke to the AP convention today, Associated Press, and I spoke to the Salem City Club on Friday, and we're going to get into all kinds of numbers and things, and I'm not a budgeteer, and I think that I teach speech at Western Oregon, and I've got all my students aware of the fact that you don't get too technical, and you got to keep it plain in order to hold your audience at all. We came to Ballot Measure 30, or to the budget that created Ballot Measure 30, because of 5 special sessions in 2002. And you need to know that Oregon's about 144 years old, and in 144 years, Oregon has held 35 special sessions. 35. 5 of them were in the year 2002, which means that the other 30 started way back when we became a state all the way up until 2002. There also was a quasi-special session last year during the general session in February. So in effect, if you go from February 2002, when the first of the 5 was held, to February 2003, when the 6th one, in 365 days you held 6 special sessions. And that is unprecedented. That is historic. More importantly, no other session of the Oregon legislature was asked to do what the 72nd legislative session was to. Stop being a general session and take up the budget for the existing biennium and redo it in some way, which is what we had to do during that session. So those who served in the 72nd session are truly, which history will record, I'm sure there are going to be quite a few articles and even books done on that session in terms of the stresses and the pressures and the burdens that were brought into that session. 5 special sessions in 1 year, 6 special sessions in 365. 35 special sessions in Oregon, 5 of them in 1 year's time in that. It was also far and away the longest special session. Now, as a result of Len Hannon moving on, I now will be, I found that out the other day, the most veteran member of the Oregon legislature of all 90. I was there in the 1981 general session, which was the longest in history. It was replaced by the 93 session, and now it's been replaced by the 2003. I have served in all those sessions the longest. 2003 was longer, just blew the roof right off the building in terms of how long it took. So there's that particular thing you need to know too. So the longest session. In addition, this session was facing, every other day we were hearing out of New York that our credit ratings were going in the tank. Our credit ratings continued to be lowered by one credit agency, by 2, 3. So our credit rating was also under serious siege. There is the issue of basic services and programs, and it's interesting, after all the cuts and everything, finally the Oregon legislature, Democrat and Republican, rural, urban, conservative, liberal, however you want to find it, agreed basically on the level of services that this state should have during a crisis. And it's interesting in terms of this debate we're having right now. Really, we're not questioning the kinds of programs and services. We're questioning how it should be paid for. So there is that issue. We came to a conclusion after all that work what the core services of government should be. Another reason that we produced the budget we did, we agreed on what we should at least have out there. We had many cuts. I have here, I'm not going to go through all the material I have here of the freezes, the layoffs, the efficiencies, the unprecedented things that were done over 5 sessions because of downfalls and deficits, et cetera, et cetera. But no time in Oregon's history has they ever cut as much, laid off as much, frozen as much as that session had to do, the general session, which followed all those special sessions. Finally, there's one other thing you should know. In May of '02, the primary, September of '02, January of '03, and September of '03, the legislature put things on the ballot. In effect, this state was suffering from what you call ballot fatigue. That is a significant reason the legislature decided to make the tough vote on the House and Senate floor and to put together the budget, which is now put in question by this ballot measure. We had reached the conclusion that we should make the tough call, both the House and the Senate, Democrat and Republican alike. And that'll bring my conclusion. This state, like few other states, will no longer allow its legislators to increase any revenues, be they fees, be they taxes, you name it. We cannot increase any of them unless we have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. That was not the situation in '81, and that was not the situation in '93. It is the situation today. There are 30 members in the Senate. Instead of 16 votes with a simple majority, it takes 18. There are 60 members in the House. Instead of 31 votes, it takes 38. So, in effect, you had to get a majority, not only a majority, a supermajority of both houses to go along with the governor. So I think in the end, this is a budget which was well thought out. It came after many painful months of cuts, many painful months of analysis and efficiencies. And it's a budget that provides for the essential services of the state of Oregon. One last thing. It's an honor to be here in Multnomah County, to be in the seat of Multnomah County government. But you need to know something. This is one of 36 counties. This budget, to be sure, speaks to the services in this county and the Tri-County area. But it also speaks to 35 other counties that are out there statewide. Schools, public safety, human resources, and natural resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Courtney. Representative Jeff Kropp has arrived while we were speaking, and so for his benefit, I'll go over the format again here. We are giving roughly 3-minute introductory statements by each of the participants. Representative Kropp, you're up next, but I have an introduction to do. So if you're willing to let me go on for a minute or two here introducing you, would that give you enough time to prepare for your 3-minute or so intro?
I'm ready to go.
Okay. Our next speaker is Representative Jeff Kropp. He was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in November of 1998. He's been re-elected for a 3rd term now and is going to be serving as chair of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. He currently resides in Sublimity. As I understand it, as I looked at your legislative district, you represent Mount Jefferson and Three-Fingered Jack and some areas that are very, very scenic, and so I've been in your district with great pleasure. Thank you very much for that. He currently is working as a sales representative for Willamette AG. He also is a real entrepreneur. He has started or owned many different businesses. He is also, and I can verify this by having actually seen him in action, he is a very talented musician, professional too. His ventures as a businessman include Halsey Mini Storage and Bombers Deli. He is a fifth-generation Oregon farmer and the owner now of Crop Peppermint Farms since 1987. The crops there being peppermint, pumpkin seeds, and of course in that part of the state, grass seed. He's also been involved in the community in many ways. He's served on the Halsey Planning Commission. He was chairman of that. And the Halsey Fire Department, where he was volunteer fire captain. He's also been a fire prevention teacher. He has flown in the Civil Air Patrol, and in 1994 he was named Firefighter of the Year. When he has free time, obviously he enjoys music, but he also runs, he lifts weights, he writes, he sings, he travels, and flies. During the 2001 session, Representative Kropp served on Ways and Means Subcommittee on General Government. In the 2003 session, he was chair of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. He serves on the Transportation Committee, has been co-chair of Water, Agriculture, and Natural Resources. An experienced legislator. Representative Kropp, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I knew that music stuff was going to get me in trouble somewhere along the line. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight, and thanks for inviting me. I do have perhaps a different opinion than my good friend Senator Courtney here on this issue of Measure 30, but I have to tell you that we agree on one thing. We agree, I think, that in Oregon we care, and me being a native of this state, we care very much about what this state looks like and what we want it to look like. And I think we agree that we want an Oregon that has a great educational system, has a solid medical system that meets the needs of the people of this state, clearly has a tax and regulatory structure that encourages the formation of business and capital formation, and that provides an opportunity for business to flourish here. It doesn't seem too far out of line to believe that I care about those things too, and those are things I want. I think the disagreement comes in as to how we get there. And Measure 30, to me, is one of these points of respectful disagreement. I believe fully that Oregon can live within its means of current revenue that we have today without the Measure 30 tax increase. And I think that I can give you some examples here shortly that will give you food for thought and pause in that regard. Did you know that at the end of the session there was $759 million in ending fund balances? This is money that had been given, was in various state accounts. Some of it was accessible, and the legislature took about $60 million of that. There is more that is accessible. It would take law changes, statutory changes, to be able to access some of that dollars. Did you know that we're spending about $1.7 billion in information technology spending out of the $37 billion total funds budget of this state? $1.7 billion. I would question, as a businessman, I know that as a farmer, sometimes I've not been able to spend certain amounts of money that I wanted to, that I felt were important, because I simply didn't have it. I'm wondering, is some of that $1.7 billion really necessary? Could it be delayed? I think so. We're going to have about $135 million in an ending balance that will most likely improve as the economy improves. We're going to have about another $30 million in reversions that have come back from the 01-03 biennium. This is money that agencies were allotted, but they found out they really didn't need to spend it after all. We've got about $50 million in special e-board appropriations. These are special appropriations by e-board. And e-board has to make a decision to appropriate that money, or they can withhold it and use it potentially to make up for any shortfalls. There's, in addition to that $50 million, there's another $40 million, which is the regular e-board appropriation. There's about 2,600 government positions that are split funded between general fund and federal funds that, well, I call them phantom positions. We've given the agencies money to hire these folks. They haven't hired them for over 6 months, which calls into question in my mind logically that maybe they don't need them if they haven't hired them in 6 months. That's roughly $104 million, just depending on how you split the funding between the federal and general fund. There's also, I just came about 2 hours ago from a briefing from Legislative Fiscal Office. Department of Human Resources is going to have an additional $95 million from reduction or lesser caseload growth than they thought they were going to have. That was a rather shocking amount of money to me. So add into that another $95 million that DHS is not going to spend out of their $9.4 billion budget. Did you know that the state of government, the size of state government is still the same today, 47,200 state employees, as we had 2 years ago, 47,200. Although during the special sessions we did cut 760 positions. 500 of those came from the Oregon State Police and the Oregon Youth Authority. Those folks have all been hired back, but in different agencies. Just a couple other quick things for you. Outside consultants tell us that they can save typically 20% in internal savings in efficiencies within state agencies just by analyzing the barriers, talking with the service delivery people. And in fact, the governor and Gary Weeks, the director of Department of Administrative Services, has engaged the services of a consultant to look at this very thing. Dr. Peter Turney from Portland State University was a former professor there. Some of you may know him. Has a company called Cost Technologies, and this is what he does. He actually has had a contract with Multnomah County. He is currently engaged in a contract with South Dakota Department of Transportation. He told us that they're finding efficiencies in the neighborhood of 20% the first time around. Second time around, they come back a year later and find an additional 10%. So there are clearly some opportunities for efficiencies, and to the governor's credit, he has taken us up on that offer and is working on that. There are some other things to talk about, but I think you understand my position is that I believe that there is reprioritized, redirected spending that could be achieved with money we have today that does not require a tax increase, and we can still take care of the core functions of government, the important functions of government that we need to.
Thank you, Representative Kropp. At this point, we've heard the legislative perspective. We're about to hear from the stakeholders, basically, on their perspective. But I'd like to take a brief pause right now and, with the aid of some visuals on the screen there, show you what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. I think there's some confusion, at least in some people's minds, over what we mean here. So here's Ballot Measure 30, and the official title of it is Enacts Temporary Personal Income Tax Surcharge, Increases and Changes Corporate and Other Taxes. And we can get into the details of that later, which other taxes, and avoids specific budget cuts. Result of a yes vote. If you vote yes on Measure 30, you agree with the legislature. You think that we should have the temporary personal income tax surcharge. In other words, even though this is an initiative or a referendum in which the people who circulated the petitions said, no, we don't want it, if you vote their way, you're voting no on this. So it's wonderful. At any rate, just consider yourself to be in the position of a legislator. If you vote yes, then you are voting to enact the temporary personal income tax and other taxes. If you vote no, you retain the existing tax system, and by virtue of the enactment of the legislature, you then trigger the 544 or so million in budget cuts, which are identified, as I understand it, in what the legislature passed. So that's the effect. We have another nifty little two visuals here. Look at that. Okay. See? Yes on ballot measure to support the tax increase, or no if you do not support it. This is nifty stuff. Okay. Well, I think you understand where we are on this, and we'll continue now with our opening statements from our two stakeholders. First, Ellen Lowe. If there is a definition of good citizen, Ellen Lowe personifies it. She claims to have retired in 1999 after 13 years as Director of Public Policy for Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. But of course, those of us who know her and know her biography realize that's not true. She has since then continued to represent the Oregon Law Center, the Oregon Food Bank, United Way of Columbia-Willamette, and the people they serve. She is a social servant. She serves currently on the Health Services Commission and the Insurance Pool Governing Board as a consumer voice in the implementation of the Oregon Health Plan, which of course is affected by Measure 30. She is Vice Chair of the Oregon Opportunity Task Force at OHSU and the Legislative Chair for HSCO, which stands for Human Services Coalition of Oregon. She also, as Senator Courtney indicated, served 2 terms on the Salem City Council, and she was the first female president of the League of Oregon Cities. And she served on state boards and commissions and continues to do so, has done for more than 30 years. Ellen Lowe.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate today in a discussion of one of the most important decisions that Oregonians will be making, I think, in our lifetime. I'd like to really expand somewhat on what Senator Courtney was saying about the legislative session. For in my observation, the longest legislative session on record, it was 227 days. And by the way, I was there all but 2 of those days as a watchbird watching, that maybe this session needed to be that long in order for legislative leaders and their colleagues who had leadership qualities to have the space and the time to reason together about Oregon's future. For as they examined Oregon's unmet needs and physical realities, the process helped them to develop a measure of trust. They asked questions about the consequences of service cuts taken during the previous 5+1 special sessions. They listened to the answers. They reviewed impacts down to the neighborhood level. They became aware that the loss of jobs was not just state, but also with community-based service providers and their suppliers. For example, our largest employer in Portland is OHSU, and that pattern is repeated across the state. For example, when you cut the Oregon Health Plan, the real impact is local. It's jobs and it's services. And they discovered that healthcare facilities are linked to many local suppliers of goods and services, Oregon's small businesses. They also noted the federal match of $1.71 for every Oregon General Fund dollar. So when you take away $1, you're taking away $2.71 worth of services. Legislators heard from their constituencies about the physical and human costs, and they concluded that the stability that I seek for low income in Oregon is the same stability that is necessary for helping agencies and business interests to maintain their capacity to exist. This search for stability had 2 separate but complementary paths. One to find a revenue stream that wouldn't continue to mortgage our future and downgrade our bond rating. The other was to do what was essentially a triage examination of the most essential services. For revenue, I acknowledge advancing means testing, the medical deduction for the elderly, my age group. On programs, Ways and Means members had difficult choices as they sought to protect our most vulnerable Oregonians and the systems that serve them. They had listened to testimony and they reached out to many of us. I had phone calls on weekends and evening meetings. All of their decisions did not meet with unanimous approval of their colleagues. You heard from Representative Kropp, or of the many lobbyists and advocates, including me. But I have the utmost respect for the informed inquiry and persistence that went into the decision-making. The restoration of general assistance, support for impaired seniors and the disabled, mental health and chemical dependency treatment for the Oregon Health Plan standard population, a new medically needy program bringing TANF, that's our welfare stipends, back to the 91 level, would not have happened without the wisdom and caring of these Ways and Means members. Similar triage examinations took place for pre-K through 12, higher ed, the courts, corrections, child protection, housing, for all general fund supported activities. And because the legislature provided instructions for program disappropriation if Measure 30 is defeated, we know where Oregon's roof is leaking and where the supports are showing stress. And I ask you to go to your computer and put in the word disappropriation, because it will come back and tell you there is no such word. It's misappropriation. Now, I do need to say that I believe that the bipartisan balanced plan that came forward safeguards our present by allowing our most critical systems to maintain the capacity to serve in our time of crisis. It looks to our future by providing a relatively stable environment for a discussion of Oregon's tax system and opportunities for change. The plan, HB 2152, which regrettably became Measure 30, was representative democracy at its best, and it merits our affirmation with a yes vote. And I thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Our final speaker, and I have great sympathy for the fact that he's going last, being a W myself, is J.L. Wilson. He is the Oregon State Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, which I was surprised to see is indeed, it's listed as the largest and most influential small business organization in the state. Well, you would be if you had over 12,000 members. So you're the head of quite an organization, JL. Prior to joining, as it's known, NFIB, Mr. Wilson held key staff positions for two speakers of the Oregon House of Representatives. In 1998, he was the communications director for Speaker Lynn Lundquist, and in the 1999 session, he served as director of legislation for Speaker of the House Lynn Snodgrass. He's also an advocate for Oregon small business through his own public service. He is the small business representative on the Oregon Workers' Compensation Management Labor Advisory Committee, which sets workers' compensation policy in Oregon. In addition, he's also on the board of directors of Oregon's Small Business Development Centers. In 1996, J.L. Wilson graduated from Willamette University with a degree in economics. His roots in the Oregon small business community are deep. His family has owned and operated 2 radio stations in Southern Oregon since 1957, and he currently resides with his wife and daughter in Kaiser. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Jim. I don't want to take anything away from the 2003 legislature because it was really quite remarkable in the achievements. And the truth be known, with House Bill 2152, the tax bill, you know, I don't begrudge a single person for voting for that tax increase. I like the gutsy decision to make the hard call and do it yourself without going to the voters. And you know, truth be told, it's not a black and white decision. It is a mixed bag of pros and cons on either side. Now, I will tell you, my association opposes the tax increase, so therefore we have a strong no position on Measure 30. But I don't want that to translate in the fact that I begrudge anybody who voted for that issue, because being in that building for as long as they were, and listening to the vast amounts of information you get from all constituency groups, it was a tough choice. And so I don't want to just make it sound like you know, it was a remarkable decision, one I disagree with but respect. Now, marching on to Measure 30, our unique position and the angle that we bring is simply one of economics and job creation. As Jim alluded to, I represent 12,000 companies. It's just a little over 12,000 that are here, small businesses in the state of Oregon. Truth is, it was about 14,000 3 years ago before the recession hit. And it is sobering, but to be an executive director of an association which loses membership by virtue of businesses closing doors or by virtue of freeing up $15, $25 a month in cash flow is very sobering, and it gets you in tune to economic reality really quick, which is why we oppose Measure 30. Because when you look at the Salem area, and there have been you think that things are on the rebound, although that's very hard to discern, because in the last couple of months we've had major employers like Sumco and Tyco and State Farm move about 1,000 jobs total out of the Salem area. I just read in the Oregonian that the Portland-Vancouver metro area is the #1 unemployed metro area in the nation, and that Oregon has the second highest unemployment rate in the country. Now, the folks that I represent obviously have a stake in trying to succeed in their business, to grow and employ people who then in turn pay taxes. Now, if we were sitting here, we wouldn't be sitting here if employment rates were a normal 3.5% to 4%. There would be no need for something like the tax increase embodied in House Bill 2152, because quite honestly, the services would be paid for. So we have a short-term solution in House Bill 2152, which unfortunately conflicts with the larger solution, which is how do you stimulate growth in the private sector and subsequently fund all the needs that you have in the public sector? Because really, if we can't agree that private sector growth precedes public sector growth, then we really don't have much to talk about. Because the constituency that I represent has a strong belief that if the private sector isn't healthy, then you're going to have a sad state of deterioration in all other, whether it's nonprofits or whether it's the public sector. So job one, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as my membership is concerned, is how do you stimulate growth in the private sector, the private economy from which the revenues flow. And so that is our particular take on Measure 30. It's why we oppose it, because my constituency is responsible for the lion's share of the tax increases that are levied, and we view it as a direct impediment on job growth and economic growth and the things that we basically need to be able to fund government services to the level that we desire. So we view that economic and job growth is really the long-term solution, and the short-term solution embodied in House Bill 2152 runs in conflict with that, and we believe that it's better to keep your eyes on the prize. How can you maintain consistent, steady economic and job growth in the state that will consequently fund the services we agree on? So that's NFIB's take on House Bill 2152 and now House Ballot Measure 30, why we're opposed to the measure, and there are a lot of nuances, and that's the main crux of our argument is job growth, economic growth, but of course I'm happy to answer questions on any front. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. I think that's been very helpful to all of us to hear your thoughts. I'd like to start this moderated discussion by tossing out a question which I'd like, if possible, maybe Representative Kropp and J.L. Wilson to address first, and then Senator Courtney and Ellen Lowe to respond to. I haven't heard during any of these presentations anybody mentioning the hit that education would take if Measure 30 passed. And I wonder if you could respond to the argument made that education in Oregon is already on the ropes, and if Measure 30 passes, this could really be the death knell for public education as we've known it in Oregon.
Thank you. I guess I can start first. And my response to that, Jim, is I don't shy away from the fact that there won't be cuts, and I don't pretend that there won't be cuts as a consequence of Measure 30 not passing. I think the average Oregonian and the average person who owns and runs a small business in NFIB will take a look and say, why are Oregon schools funded at the top 10 in the country in terms of dollars per student? And the level varies, but I saw the Business Council's number say $8,500 per student, which puts us at number 10, down to the OEA's numbers, which puts us at 20th in the country. But the bottom line is we're in the top half of all states in how we fund K through 12 on a per student basis. So why is it Oregon that's just on the ropes in terms of our system and not being able to afford a full school year? And that really doesn't resonate well. And so the question is, why would we, the situation may be dire, but why would you continue to fund something that is fundamentally mismanaged as the numbers would suggest? And so that's something that a lot of small business owners, they don't know what to make of it, and so then the reaction is we're not gonna feed that system more money.
let's address the issue of cuts first. In House Bill 5077, there are $544 million worth of cuts that are mandatory that have to take place immediately. There's roughly another 250 or so that the governor can choose to delay should he decide to do that. And as in my opening comments, I listed a number of dollar figures for you: ending balance, reversions, amounts of money that are greater than that $250 million that could be used to offset that. So first of all, I think the cut will be less than what people think it will be, because I think there will be great pressure by individuals such as Ellen here, and certainly those in the education community, for the governor to, and the legislators, from the E-Board especially, to appropriate money to keep that to a lower level. Will there be reductions? Absolutely. Many of my school districts that I have the honor of representing are budgeting at $4.8 billion and not at the $5.2 billion figure. And many of those are actually increasing programs as a result of that. Keep in mind also that any offset or any reduction in K-12 funding is going to be offset by $237 million in PERS savings. And in fact, does that have any impact on a local school district? I would refer you to the December 9th edition of the Oregon Statesman Journal newspaper in Salem, where it talks about the Salem School District is implementing $4 million worth of new programs, and they use the word new, based on PERS savings. So they are real, at least for the next couple of years until the court strikes them down, if they do, or if they don't. But also keep in mind that in talking about per student funding, if you take the, I think the $8,000 figure roughly is what is quoted if you consider the ADMW weighted figure, which is actually a fictitious figure. If you actually take the number of kids who show up at any school, all schools across Oregon every day, you will see, that's called average daily attendance, you'll see that that figure rises to $10,000 per student. And then if you add in long-term bond debt for construction and so forth, you'll see that the actual spending per student in K-12 system varies by school district. I have one that it's up to $18,000 if you figure a $50 million bond in there. So also keep in mind that the Cascade Policy Institute's recently released report, and I would urge you to read this. You can get it online. It's called Halfway There, Measure 5. Talks about how that in 1991, K-12 education from the legislature and your local property tax dollars was funded at $2.85 billion. In 2001, it was funded at $4.35 billion, again from the legislature and from your local dollars. If you look at the compounded growth of inflation and student enrollment increase, there is an additional 8% on top of that. So education funding, even under Measure 5, has increased, inflation adjusted and student enrollment adjusted. I think what's clear is that we're headed for a train wreck in K-12 education spending. We're roughly at $5.2 billion right now, adding on the additional $237 million from PERS savings. We will have the roll-up cost. Next session will put K-12 spending at $6 billion. Rob Kramer's done an analysis that if the education advocates say that we need $6.6 billion to fund the quality education model appropriately, if you take that, plus the automatic increases that are set up in the system for pay increases, step increases, education increase allowances, so on and so forth, that you will have by the year 2015 the K-12 budget consuming the entire general fund budget. I think that that's a problem. I think next year, or next session, having to go in and ask for $6 billion for K-12 education, when we may or may not have a recovering economy, hopefully we will, is going to be very difficult. So I think the education community is going to have to rethink how they're spending their dollars also.
Thank you. Comments from the yes on 30 people?
You know, I've said the only thing wrong with kids are adults. And
You're not calling me kid, are you?
it's the only thing wrong with children or adults is what I said. The struggle now is, I think everybody here agrees that we need a quality education from K through 12. I think we do. Now we're fighting about how well the money is spent, and I don't know what to do about that here tonight. I don't manage a school district. I've never been on a school board. I'm not a part of the Department of Education. When one says that we average this amount per student versus other states, that means we're spending too much. I mean, those statements, I was raised in West by God, Virginia, which ranked 50th in the nation in public education. And if it hadn't been for some Franciscan nuns, I never would have graduated from high school. And all I'm saying is, if you feel that the money is being misspent in K through 12s, or that we don't need to spend that amount much on a student, then obviously you're going to vote against this measure, and I understand that. I'd like to be number one in the nation with our kids in terms of what it takes, in terms of the quality education, in terms of the facilities. I mean, I hate to tell you this, I have 3 sons, and I'm going to tell you is that children everywhere, whether it's here or in other parts of the state, deserve the best we can give them, particularly for the world that's becoming very global economy oriented, multilingual type of things, the computerization, the science. It's extraordinary what this younger generation is going to have to deal with, even compared to the younger members up here. And the better we can educate them, the better chances they're going to have to survive, is also to keep the civilization moving. And Jeff, you might not accept this, and JL, the quality education model, and I don't know if you accept that or not, we're starting to use that more and more to decide how much money the legislature should put in education. And all I know is they're saying that if this thing goes down $284 million plus, it means basically you're going to affect some 3,950 teachers. There's a good chance you're going to see your class size grow. In the elementary schools, up to somewhere 26 in a class, up to 26 in the high school classes, or you're going to reduce your school years by 19 days. Now, again, these are just figures and statistics, and I don't like these kinds of discussion. I tell my speech class I don't, because they're just numbers. And we can play a numbers game all we want up here. Jeff is right. Some school districts have started to plan for this. That is an accurate statement. But other school districts, we heard of one today in Medford, they're going to get hit very hard. Once again, this discussion is not just the school districts here, the school districts in Def's area. I'm from Salem, and I will tell you Salem is going to get hit, and get hit hard. And so we are going to disappropriate $284 million if the measure goes down. What that means, I've got to think that in terms of our credit rating, in terms of the cartoons and other images that we have in this state, you're going to have impacts in K through 12. And I don't know how to respond to we're spending too much money on kids, or there's efficiencies here that should be done. I mean, I don't know what to do with that. If that's what you believe, all right. I think as a legislator, we looked at this very, very hard. We looked at the quality education model. We struggled over this, whether it should be 4.9, 5.1, 5.3, 5.6, 6.1 or 6.2 billion. We fought like crazy over this. In the end, we came down to somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.1 to $5.2 billion over the next 2 years. That's what we did. Democrats and Republicans, all school districts. And then we had to put together a budget that basically funded a certain amount, and the amount we came up with, and then we'll have to disappropriate, because we cannot take it all out of human resources. That's the thing that's got me worried. If we just try to save schools, we're going to annihilate public safety in this thing. You're going to annihilate human resources. It's a balancing thing that goes on. So I don't know how else to answer this question. It's a tough question. I respect what Jeff and JL said. I just think you have this going on right now, that our schools aren't well run. There's efficiencies that can be had there. We don't need to give them as much money as we're giving them. And that's their response. My response is the best I can give you. And I now would like to turn it over to Ellen if she wants to, and see what she has to say about a very important question, but a very difficult question to answer.
My father was chairman of the school board when I was born, so I have a long history of association with school politics, and he served some 18 years on a school board. And one of the things I know that he valued was the ability to make local decisions locally. And so I think there are some real policy choices, perhaps, ahead of Oregonians about education, about pre-K through 12. Back in 1961, when I was president of the PTA at Holyrood Elementary School here in the Portland district, about 1/4 of our funding came from the state. With Ballot Measure 5, that was switched. And so when you talk about education taking over the general fund, well, there was a policy decision really made by voters. But there are other decisions, perhaps because of that, that need to be examined at a statewide level. But I would say that in Oregon, I think the kind of values my father have are still there in many of those districts. We have a lot of small school districts in Oregon, and they aren't there just for the education of children. They're also there as community centers. And so there may be some ways of saving some dollars, but there may be costs then in eliminating some of the ability of local people to impact what is going on in education. I have to say, as the grandmother of 4 Oregonians who are in public schools, I look at those class sizes and they are so much higher than one of my grandsons in his first grade, there were 33. When my daughter was in the first grade, there were 19. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I am seeing. So I think there are some real impacts to the quality of education. And it's one of the reasons that when I talked about the stability that I hoped Measure 30 would give us, that it would give us an opportunity as Oregonians to really look at how we want to fund public services, and that's at all levels of government. I could also add that a grandson who's a senior at Grant, this is this last year and this year, in order to continue his studies in foreign language, his parents have paid tuition at Portland State. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are happening to my grandchildren, where my children had a fantastic education.
Thanks. Let me toss out one more question here, and then we can go to questions from the audience. If you could just respond briefly. Let me make this for Senator Courtney and Ellen Lowe. According to the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, and I hesitate, Senator, to toss out more figures, but here are some anyway. Over the past 25 years, the Oregon State budget has increased at an annual rate of 13%. Now, I know some of that came about as a result of Measure 5 in 1990, throwing most of the education budget into the general fund. But even factoring that in, I think it's maybe safe to say that the state government continues to grow. How would you respond to the argument that we don't have a revenue problem here, we really have a spending problem?
Well, it's interesting. It's the K through 12 issue, but we've talked about it. You've gone back 25 years, and I'm not. First of all, the state has dramatically grown in the last 15 years, but you have a K through 12 issue where we had to now take over funding for K through 12 because of Ballot Measure 5. You have some significant public safety issues now in terms of ballot measures that have been passed that we have to pay for. Your health care costs have gone up dramatically in the Oregon Health Plan, and all those things the state government is involved in now and trying to take care of. And I believe that basically the legislature supports those efforts. That explains some of it. You mentioned that, but I asked, Jeff was saying he spent time with Legislative Revenue and Fiscal Office. I've spent some time with him too, and I wonder what's going on. We need to go see him together, Jeff. Because they have said to me today that the growth of government, at least since the late 80s, has not been greater than the growth of personal income in the state in terms of, and they have said that, and I think they can document that. So here we go again, different sources saying different things. If you take a look at some of the restrictions that we have done, we put the kicker in place in 1979, which was a way to attempt to try to put money back in people's pockets. We have a spending limit cap in the state of Oregon. A lot of people may not know that, but that exists, and the budget cannot exceed 8% of the projected personal income in Oregon. That's been in existence. That law is in effect. We also have a law in effect in the state of Oregon that limits the number of state positions. The limit equals 1.5% of the state's population in the previous year. And if you look at the number of state employees we have now under that limit, the number we could have is estimated to be somewhere around 52 to 53,000. Instead, we have somewhat 41,000 state employees. So, we've placed caps on spending. We've placed caps on the number of employees we've had. We've got these other major public funding projects that have come our way, K through 12, Ballot Measure 11, the Oregon Health Plan rising cost. We've also placed on the Oregon legislature they can't increase any revenues except through supermajorities. So I don't know, and we even passed a major efficiency measure this last session, which involves vacancies and things in terms of returning the money that's been saved on vacancies, both in July of this year as well as April of next year. So I don't know what else to say in terms of restrictions in state government, measures that we've taken to try to control spending, as well as to try to explain where some of that spending came from, as opposed to just spend, spend, spend.
Ms. Lowe, do you have any thoughts on that?
We're
trying to keep it reasonably brief if we can, because we want to get
I'd
to the
just
audience.
like to mention about the Oregon Health Plan that actually the costs of the Oregon Health Plan have not gone up as much as the private insurance that my husband and I carry in terms of the annual increases that we have. And so that I think, again, we have made some choices in terms of spending. And the Oregon Health Plan expanded to include singles and adults, families without minor children. And one of the reasons was to lower the cost shift of uncompensated health care to those of us in the private sector and healthcare providers. And Oregon's Medicare reimbursement, for example, is very low, and it's based on what our costs are. Our costs in Oregon are less for healthcare than they are in most other states. And so we may be putting more into the Oregon Health Plan, but I would suggest that it means that we're putting then less into the costs that would come to the rest of us in terms of uncompensated care. Another example of spending, food stamps expenditures are now part of the budget. They didn't used to be. Do you know that over $1 million a day comes into the Oregon economy as a result of the federal food stamps? And so, again, some choices we have made, and I would say that they boost our economy and assist Oregonians.
Gail, Jeff, any thoughts?
Well, on the question of spending, I guess I don't know what there is to say about that, because you can have dueling economists or throw out whatever numbers. The only thing I just kind of lament is the basic tendency to spend right up to the exact amount that you have. I'm not totally given over to runaway government and on that kind of stuff, because the bottom line is the economy produced a lot of money during the 90s, and it was there for the legislature to spend. I guess I just wish there was some foresight that might say the good times might not last forever, and you have enough of a buffer where swings like this don't cause the catastrophic problems that they do now. But there has been a lot of money, and I think government has grown significantly, but it was a result of a hot economy and state government taking on some things that it hadn't before. So, the issue resonates with a lot of voters. It resonates with a lot of my constituency, but.
Well, let me throw out an interesting idea for you. By the way, since 1969, and you can go on Oregon Tax Research website and look up this number, since 1969, Oregon's general fund budget, not total funds, but general funds budget, has increased at twice the rate of population and inflation growth combined, twice the rate. So it's not just a phenomenon as a result of Measure 5 and Oregon Health Plan and corrections issues. I have to say, here's the thought for you. In the last 5 budgets, what would have happened if the legislature had had the wisdom, as JL was talking about, to set aside 2% of the general fund budget and just save it, and then let it grow on a compounded interest rate, the same that the public employees retirement system did during the great boom years of the 90s. We would have saved exactly $1 billion in lesser spending, and that money would have grown with compounded interest to $1.97 billion. And I've done these calculations on a yearly basis, and I've done them more than once, so I think I'm fairly accurate. It's unfortunate that Oregon has been unable, for whatever reasons, to set aside money. Many states have. Many of the businesses that some of you work for have reserves. We have reserves in our private life. It's called savings and investments. Those are there for a reason. And Oregon, I think, could have done a great deal to have had the foresight to have done this. Again, we would have had almost $2 billion in savings plus $1 billion in lesser spending. So right now, instead of spending $11.4 billion in general fund, we'd be spending about $10.4. And we would still have some money in the bank. We would not have used up our total $2 billion. There are several other states that have done this too, by the way, and so it is not an uncommon phenomenon. I think what we need is a constitutional spending limit that establishes at the same time a reserve fund that is funded in certain manners. There's been some interesting ideas out there. Colorado has enacted one that has worked pretty well for them, and I think that we could follow that also. In regards to the Oregon Health Plan, I will tell you, and I'll conclude here shortly, because we do want to take questions. My wife is a human resource manager for a very large grass seed company. And she is very frustrated at times because of the stories that she tells me of the abuse that she sees by people she manages in the Oregon Health Plan. People who really don't belong in the Oregon Health Plan, that can afford their own private health insurance, can afford to put their dependents on their own private health insurance, but don't because the eligibility requirements in Oregon are such that they can. And I think that's unfortunate because I too want to always be able to take care of, through whatever means we devise, the needs of people, the poorest among us, the people who are really hurting. If a person goes on the Oregon Health Plan and goes out and buys a new truck, it seems to me maybe that person ought not be there. Again, this is just farmer common sense here. So I want to take care of people too. I want a great, clean state. I want a good educational system. But I also want that to be accountable, and I want it to be efficient.
We've been getting such good information. I've not been cutting people off here, and I thank you very much. But we do have time now for some questions from the audience. There's a mic there and I see a hand going up in the back row. If you'd care to identify yourself and direct your question to one or to all of the panel.
I guess this question probably would be directed to Jeff. And there was an article in the Oregonian this morning that placed the state and local tax burden of Oregon citizens at 40th in the nation. Do you think that's too high?
40th meaning in the lower percentile of burden. Actually, I think that you can play games with all kinds of statistics. I would submit to you also, if you look at the U.S. Census Bureau figures from 2000, you will see, and I think this is also available on Oregon Tax Research if you want to find that and go to their website and look at this. If you look at, Oregon ranks number 4 in the nation in total government revenue. Now, what is total government revenue? Well, it's taxes that we pay, it's fees that we pay, it's federal money that comes back to Oregon, which is our taxes that we pay. And so I think that you could make a reasonable argument that, in fact, Oregon is one of the, if you look at all of our tax burden, that it is considerably higher. And so in my view, I think you can skew the statistics in many ways. And people on my side of this argument have a tendency to do that also, by the way.
Other questions? This one right there.
I'm Ruth Shepard, a City Club member. Thank you all and each of you for a public dialogue that's overdue, and we need to continue it somehow regularly. You're already talking about what our tax structure should look like. The legislature is already looking at that. But we have the reality in just a few days, literally, of doing something that may be more binding than you can imagine. One of those binds might be, in fact, that with the destruction of human services, whether you believe that dramatic word or not, you can look at the information. How can you recover from that in various areas? For instance, services to the elderly that are really innovative, which have given small business a huge boost with home health care and other things like that, because of our innovative state policies to begin with. So I come back to the particulars, and there is I picked up outside the executive summary from the Oregon Center for Public Policy, and I'm just wondering which one of you, or each one of you, how you respond. Do you believe these to be true? The middle-income households will pay $81 in net additional taxes under Measure 30 in 2003, or less than $7 a month. That same middle-income Oregonian will get an $844 federal tax cut in 2003. Low-income households will pay about $14 in net additional taxes. Low-income Oregonians will get a $106 federal tax cut in 2003. The richest
one. Off, but I think we're getting the idea anyway. I wonder.
Well, I'd like to know. There's just one more comparison. The richest 1% of Oregonians will pay $4,084 in net. The richest 1% of Oregonians will benefit from a $36,500 federal tax cut in 2003. I just would like to know the opinion of the participants, whether they believe those figures to be true or not, and if not, why.
Go ahead.
I'll open it up, Jim. You know, this has become like a fantasy that this is a tax that's being levied that nobody's going to have to pay. With all the numbers, and I heard it even during the discussion, that it's going to cost this family $2 a month and a family in Harney County $3 a month. Listen, from a typical small business owner who makes $40,000 to $50,000 a year, it'll probably be, I don't know, I don't even know where they fall in the tax brackets, but I think it's safe to say it'd be a couple $100. I think if you look at the others that pertain to business, in addition to the income taxes, you have a permanent increase in corporate minimums, which if you're a C Corp, like our radio stations, and it's basically $1 million C Corp, the corporate tax, the minimum goes from $10 to $1,000 just for the privilege of losing money in the state of Oregon. You have corporate minimums increasing for S Corps. As you also know, the business taxes aren't just reflected in the corporate rate. Most individuals who own their businesses as an S Corp or an LLC or some other legal configuration pay their business taxes as individuals. So the minimum tax is basically a gross receipts tax, in essence, for small businesses. That's going to be a permanent function. I'm sure it doesn't take into account the loss of reduction on property taxes. So if a small business owner owns a storefront, I think that's going to be a considerable amount of money. You also have the corporate credits, in which there's a 20% deferral, which I'm sure means that you have a 20% deferral on any capital expenditure that you make, which is basically a means of artificially pumping up either corporate or personal income. So to say that the average person is going to be hit with $81 a month, basically I'm hearing that the average person has no stake in this because nobody's going to pay this tax. And I just ticked off 4 ways in which the average middle-class small business owner is going to be hit from several angles on this tax. So do I agree with the $81? I mean, not really. I'm not sure how you come up with that.
I have reviewed the full papers that back up these executive summaries. And I stand by what they say. I think the economists have done a very accurate job in looking at this. There was one number that Ruth Shepard did not cite, and it's one that I really think we need to come back to also in terms of our economy, and that's that if we defeat Measure 30, we really are taking $1.9 billion out of our economy, because it isn't just the general fund dollars, it's also those federal dollars that are ours that would come back to assist us in providing services. And as for paying, when I advanced the elderly medical deduction at the Revenue Committee, I did so because they had said they'd never had anyone come before them and offer to pay more taxes. And I did, because I had discovered that because we itemize, my husband and I were benefiting from this deduction that wasn't means tested at all. And at the same time, at the other end of the hall, down in F rather, the Ways and Means Committee was looking at cutting services to seniors and the disabled down to less than 100% of the federal poverty level. And that's why in this same sheet, I actually put the figures of the federal poverty level, because for the Oregon Health Plan, for the standard, it's 100% of the federal poverty level is what you need to be at in order to be eligible. That's pretty poor.
Go ahead, please.
Actually, I have to agree with JL in regards that for some people, this is a much larger tax increase than $30 a year or $81 a year. If you're say you're just starting an espresso stand, and you incorporate because you want the liability protections that incorporation provides you. This is a $250 tax increase for you, because you're probably not going to make any money that first year. JL can tell you that most small businesses don't make any money for the first 3 to 5 years, depending on the nature of the business. If you own your own home and you're used to paying your property taxes early and getting that 3% discount, now you just lost 1/2 of that 3%. For a $150,000 home, that's roughly another $30. By the way, of these 10 tax increases that are in here, 6 of them are permanent, and your property tax early payment deduction is one of those permanent ones. If you smoke, you're going to pay 10 cents a pack more. If you drive a car, you're going to pay more for the privilege of driving a car. Now, that isn't part of Measure 30, is it? But this is what I call death by 1,000 cuts. Did you know that we dramatically raised your transportation fees for the transportation plan? You will the next time you go to renew your license. Believe me, you will. And by the way, I voted for that. I'm not totally anti-tax either. We also raised, and this is, Ellen, I have to say, this is one of the most curious things I've ever seen. As chairman of the Agriculture Committee, I had about 500 hunters and fishermen come in front of my committee, and I mean 500. There were 3 hearing rooms over full with people, advocating for higher fees. And so we passed higher fees for them. So if you hunt and fish, you're going to pay more too. So if you're a smoker, if you're elderly, if you're a taxpayer, if you're a homeowner, if you're a small business person, you know, and we go on and on here. And this is on top of fee increases in the 2001 session. This is on top of fee increases, the delay of Measure 88 implementation in the 5 special sessions, and now massive fee increases and a very large tax increase as a result of the 03. So this is sort of like putting the frog in the water and you start turning up the heat. He doesn't realize he's boiled to death until it's happened. And that's what's occurring here, is that we keep raising fees. And this is what, in response, ma'am, to part of your point was, we're going to get these federal tax deductions. That's right. But keep in mind, this gets back to the competitiveness argument. If Oregonians have less money to spend because we have to give back part of our federal tax cut, then that means our economy does not expand that much faster. That's a fact. And that, again, makes us as not competitive with our neighbors who are offering greater incentives and who are getting the full Bush tax cut and have a lower overall tax burden.
Senator Courtney, you have the last word if you'd like it.
This state relies, as no other state in the union relies on a single source of funding for its services, local and state, as does the state of Oregon, and that's the income tax. And we were keenly aware of that when we put this package together. And I can tell you that the individuals who helped craft it and then support it, many of them were small business people, as well as conservatives from rural areas, as well as those in the urban areas. And the thing we wanted to do was to make it as progressive as possible, to make it so that JL and his constituency and Jeff and his constituency were not overburdened. We were keenly aware of that, whether it was a business or whether it was an individual taxpayer. And the theory behind the income tax, which was the genesis of the question, is it's supposed to be a progressive tax, unlike a sales tax or a property tax, which means it's based on the ability to pay. Now, Jeff has gone into many other areas, and he's confused me a bit, which is okay. It's just that those fees he talked about, we didn't jam any fees down anybody's throat. That was not done. Even that massive transportation plan that was passed, it's interesting how we passed it. And the fact is, it's a multi-million-dollar economic package, as well as something we desperately need in terms of our infrastructure. And I must tell you that even there, we were not, ridden out of town. We paid very much attention to the constituencies. We paid very much attention to those essential goods and services. So, again, I think JL's made a brilliant statement when you say you can have dueling statistics and dueling economists, and who do you believe and who do you trust? We really tried with this package to make it not burdensome on the individual taxpayer or on the businesses. You'll have to be the judge whether we did a very good job of it or not.
I regret that this is going to have to be our final question. We have someone already waiting to ask. What's going to be tonight's last question? Go ahead.
Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Justin Gottlieb, but I want to get down to the base level here, which is jobs. Now, the rhetoric of the right seems to be that good government is no government. And I'm just curious as to Peter Courtney and Jeff Knopf, if this fails and we make substantial cuts in our government, the government in its essence will be laying off people. And will the private sector be able to absorb those jobs? We're already at a 6.2 unemployment with people coming into the state looking for work. Our income is based on people working, thus the income tax. So I'm just kind of wondering on your thoughts and opinions in regards to job creation.
Go ahead.
Good question, by the way. I will tell you that if Measure 30 fails, you won't see any job cuts in the state of Oregon. And let me explain why. Because right now, as you know, PERS retirees are retiring at record numbers. Individuals whose positions may be eliminated, frankly, will be able to find a job somewhere else in state government. I'm very confident of that because it's happening right now. But let's talk a little bit about that. There's supposedly $206 million in cuts to DHS. That's if the full $800 million is cut immediately, okay? Keeping in mind that only 544 has to be done right away, the governor can delay the rest and manage it with increased revenues and so forth. So if you take the $206 million figure, the briefing I got 3 hours ago now from Legislative Fiscal shows me that the draft DHS plan they have shows that they're only really going to cut $110 million. Why? Because $95 million is money set aside that they know they're not going to use. It was allocated to them. They have not had the caseload growth. This was a bit of a shock to me today because I thought it was only about $30 million. Couldn't believe it was 95. In the same document, it shows me that DHS is only planning to reduce their total employment by 14.75 FTE. Now, I don't know how you can cut $110 million and only reduce your employment by 14.75 FTE. I think they probably haven't finished their work in that regard. At least I'm hopeful that they are. But in answer to your question about jobs, I think we ought to be doing things that create and stimulate jobs creation in this state. And that means that every time you put a burden on small business, it's a disincentive. And by the way, JL will tell you, small business is the biggest driver of new job creation in the state, has been for a long time. Every time you put some little impediment to that, and I don't care what it is, it's just one more burden that a small business owner has got to deal with. And sooner or later, they're going to make a decision whether they want to be involved in having a business in Oregon, or maybe they want to go somewhere else, maybe across the river to Clark County.
Senator Courtney?
The question's an interesting one. It's my understanding there's three types of spendings. There's personal spending, you and I go out and spend. There's business spending, where you invest in business and things, and there is government spending. And many people in the private sector do not recognize government spending as legitimate spending. But if you go to Prineville or Burns or Warrington or Albany, all of which had Oregon Youth Authority facilities, brand new facilities, because we needed them. That wasn't just the job things. We had 250 plus youths that we needed to have under some kind of restriction. We closed those facilities, and I will tell you, while we're trying to bring them back online with this package, and we'll phase it in, I don't know what's going to happen if we don't. I'm reading the material here, and I don't want to confuse you because you've been statistics to numbers to death here tonight. When those four closed, that really affected those communities. And I remember Baker City, when they could, many of these communities, they'd do anything to get a correctional facility because it is economic development. The question, though, is will the private sector hire these people who've lost their jobs? I can't answer that. I can't answer that. It depends about their skills. It depends about the 17. We haven't even talked about higher ed or community colleges tonight. There are 17 community colleges out there. And I think Jeff would agree with me on this, and maybe he wouldn't. That's the one area this last session where when it comes to basic essential program services, we definitely underfunded, in my opinion, Jeff, both higher ed and community colleges. And, they have so much to do with the education of our workforce, particularly when your economy is going all over the place. And let's say you are deciding to move certain people out of the public sector to the private sector. You need some of those facilities, and so we didn't really address that. So it's a very interesting question. It's a tremendous struggle. I know in Salem, where I'm from, although JL, who also lives in the college, talked about all the private sector loss of job, one of the things that's really traumatized Marion County in terms of unemployment statistics is the number of public employees at all levels that have lost their job or been laid off, or type of thing, as well as those kinds of situations. So it's a complicated question. I don't think you can answer or guarantee the private sector will pick the people up, but I think we have to be honest. A person who gets a paycheck as a public employee also spends those dollars in the private sector, and the private sector really needs that, particularly if you come from smaller communities. I really do believe that's an accurate statement for me to make, and that's the best I can do with a very good and difficult question, as all these questions are.
May I just interject?
A sentence or two, if you could, and then JL also.
Okay. The question was about jobs. I think often the assumption is that public dollars go to government jobs. In human services, about 3/4 of those services are really provided by community-based organizations. They're often members of United Way, they're the child care, they're senior, they're treatment facilities. These jobs are really out there. Sometimes they're private, sometimes they're not for profit, but they are in the community. And that is, if you look at Multnomah County, for example, you will see a tremendous loss of services as a result of the loss of jobs in many of these kinds of agencies. And so, again, it isn't just those who get their paycheck directly from the state. It's private, it's not for profit, sometimes it's county.
JL, the final word falls to you if you have any. Otherwise, Ellen Lowe is our final speaker.
Good discussion. With the issue about jobs, I'm making a value statement here, and that is, private sector dollars give rise to more dollars, which in turn fund government programs and essential services. The money spent in government does not serve the same function. so the question was asked, would the private sector be able to absorb job losses that come from the public sector? I think the more fundamental question is, will the private sector, will they be able to sustain the same level of employment to sustain a government that clearly can't afford the level of jobs it sustains now? So when given competing arguments, I clearly side with the private sector. I believe that the economic recovery and job growth will have to be led by the private sector. I think that's an immutable law of economics, and I think that it applies here. So that's my final word. Thank you.
Well, I think this has just been wonderful. I think we've come to the applause line now. I want to thank the City Club of Portland, Wendy Radmacher-Willis, its executive director, for hosting this. I want to thank you, the audience, for your wonderful questions, your excellent participation, but especially our 4 panel members. Our thanks to you for helping us understand this better and for a very civilized and informative discourse. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for inviting us. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah.
I'm the one